I can't say much about this book without getting killed, probably. I will say that I've been waiting like 15 years for seeing this book. I almost cried when it actually happened. And I was like, finally. Like the point I was restrained to not call her up and setting about it, like I thought about. But Fitz has been one of my favorite characters since I first read them and tried to figure out who the hell Robin Hobb was. And back in the world of the Farseers, and as usual, Fitz's life isn't going all that great. I always thought he did his Catalyst Party, she could have that quiet retirement. Well, he did for a while, but as you might know from last year's book, it's not going that well at the moment. And we're back with book 2 of Fool's Quest. Please welcome Robin Hobb.
And I'm actually going to have to grab a copy of the book.
You have your receipt?
Got the right one.
Oh, I got the last one. That'd be quite a surprise.
No, I already read that. Well, how many people have actually read the teaser that was out on? Okay, so I might jump ahead and give a little piece from chapter 4 then, so that there's something new, and at the same time, I think it's not just well anyway. Closer to the mic, right? Let's see. I know what page it is in the UK edition, because that's what I was rehearsing from. But here we go. So this is chapter 4. Excuse me. The Fool's Tale. When winter's clutch is cold and dark, and game is scarce and forests dark, this songster to the hearth retreats, to warm his cheeks and icy feet. But on the hill and in the glen are hunters hardier than men. With lolling tongues and eyes that gleam, they surge through snow with breath like steam. For in the hunt there is no morrow, time does not wait. There is no sorrow as blood spills black and snarls are rife. For life is meat, and death brings life. And that's A Song for Night Eyes and His Friend by Hap Gladheart. A reminder of Hap is Fitz's foster son. The stairs seemed steeper than I remembered. When I reached my old bedchamber, I entered it as cautiously as befit an erstwhile assassin. I closed and locked my door, put wood on the fire, and for a short time considered simply getting into the bed and going to sleep. Then I drew the curtains shut and inspected the area where they were fastened to the rod. Yes, I saw it now, as I had not in all those years. Another tug on the drapery pole triggered the door panel, but no sound or crack betrayed it. Only when I pushed on it did it swing silently open and the narrow black staircase appear before me. I climbed the risers, stumbling once when my curly toe hooked on the step. Up in Shade's old workroom, ash had come and gone. Our dirty dishes had been tidied away, and a different pot simmered at the edge of the hearth. The fool had not moved since I left him, and I crossed the room anxiously to lean over him. "Fool," I said softly, and with a cry he flung his arms wide and sat up to cower behind his raised hands. One flying hand glanced off my cheek. As I stepped back from his bed, he cried, "I'm sorry, don't hurt me." "It's only me, only Fitz." I spoke calmly, trying to keep the anguish from my voice. "Eden, old fool, will you ever recover from what you endured?" "I'm sorry," he repeated breathlessly. "So sorry, Fitz." He was breathing hard. "When they had me, they never woke me gently, or allowed me to sleep until I woke. I so feared sleep I would bite myself to stay awake. But always, eventually, one sleeps. And then they would wake me, sometimes just a few moments later, with a little barbed blade or a hot poker." His grimace had barely the semblance of a smile. "I hate the smell of fire now." He dropped his head back on the pillow. Hatred surged in me and then passed, leaving me empty. I could never undo what they had done to him. After a time, he rolled his head toward me and asked, "Is it day now?" My mouth had gone dry and wordless. I cleared my throat. "It's either very late at night or very early in the morning, depending on how you think of such things. We spoke last in early afternoon. Have you been sleeping all this time?" "I don't know exactly. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell. Give me a few moments, please." "Very well." I retreated to the far end of the room and studiously ignored him as he tottered from the bed. He found his way to the garderobe, was there for some time, and when he emerged, called to ask if there was wash water. In a pitcher next to the bowl on the stand by your bed. But I can warm some for you if you wish. Oh, warm water, he said, as if I had offered him gold and jewels. Shortly, I replied. I set about my task. He groped his way to the chair by the fireside and sat down. I marveled at how quickly he had learned the room. When I brought the warmed water in a washing cloth, he reached for it immediately, and I realized that he had been silent so he could track my activity by what he could hear. I felt as if I spied on him as he washed his scarred face and then repeatedly scrubbed his eyes to clear the gummy mucus from his lashes. When he had finished, his eyes were clean but reddened at the rims. I spoke without apology or preamble. What did they do to your eyes? He set the cloth back in the bowl and clutched his damaged hands together, gently rubbing the swollen knuckles. He was silent as I cleared the table. Very well then, not yet. Are you hungry? I asked him. Is it time for a meal? If you're hungry, it's time for your meal. I've eaten too much already, and possibly drunk more than I should have as well. His response shocked me. Do you truly have another daughter besides Nell? I do. I sat down in my chair and pulled one of the shoes off. Her name is Bee, and she is 9 years old now. Truly? Fool, what purpose could I have for lying to you? He made no answer to that. I reached down and unfastened the second shoe. I pulled it free and put my foot flat on the floor. My left calf cramped abruptly, and I exclaimed in pain and bent to rub it. What's wrong? He asked in some alarm. Ridiculous shoes, courtesy of shade. Tall heels and pointed tips curling up at the toes. You'd laugh if you could see them. Oh, and the jacket has a skirt that goes nearly to my knees, and buttons shaped like little blue flowers. And the hat is like a floppy sack, not to mention the curly wig. A small smile perked his mouth. Then he said gravely, You've no idea how much I'd love to see it all. Fool, it's not idle curiosity that makes me ask about your eyes. If I knew what was done to you, it might help me undo it. Silence. I removed my hat and set it on the table. Standing, I began to unbutton the jacket. It was just slightly too tight in the shoulders, and suddenly I could not endure how it bound me. I gave a sigh of relief, draped it on the chair back, and sat down. The fool had picked up the hat. His hands explored it. When he set it, wig and all, upon his head, with apparent ease, he twitched the hair into place and then effortlessly arranged the hat into an artful slouch. It looks far better on you than it did on me. Fashion travels. I had a hat almost like this, years ago. I waited. He sighed heavily. What have I told you, and what haven't I? Fitz, in my darkness, my mind slips around until I scarcely trust myself at all anymore. You've told me very little. Have I? Perhaps you know very little, but I assure you that night after night in my cell I spoke with you at length and in detail. A wry twist of his mouth. He lifted the hat and set it on the table where it crouched on its wig like a small animal. Every time you ask me a question, it surprises me, for I feel that you were so often with me. He shook his head, then leaned back suddenly in his chair and for a time appeared to stare at the ceiling. He spoke into that darkness. Prilkop and I left Asleval. You know that. We journeyed to Buckkeep. What you may never have guessed is that we used the skill pillars to do so. Prilkop spoke of having learned it from his catalyst, and I had my silver fingertips from when I had touched Verity. And so we came to Buckkeep, and I could not resist the temptation to see you one last time, to have yet another final farewell. He snorted at his own foolishness. Fate cheated us both at that. We lingered for a time, but Prilkop was anxious to be on his way. 10 days he allowed me, for as you can recall, I was still very weak, and he judged it dangerous to use the pillars too frequently. But after 10 days he began to chafe to be on our way again. Nightly he urged me to leave, pointing out what I knew, that together you and I had already worked the change that was my mission. Our time together was done, and long past done. Lingering near you would only provoke other changes in the world, changes that might be far less desirable. And so he persuaded me, but not completely. I knew it was dangerous, I knew it was self-indulgent, even as I carved it. The three of us together as we once had been. You, Night Eyes, and me. I shaped it from the skill stone and I pressed my farewell into it. Then I left my gift for you, knowing well that when you touched it, I would be aware of you. I was startled. You were? I told you. I have never been wise. But I felt nothing of you. Well, there was the message, of course. I felt cheated by him. He had known that I was alive and well, but had kept his own situation concealed from me. I'm sorry. He sounded sincere. After a moment, he continued. We used the pillars again when we left Buckkeep. It was like a child's game. We jumped from one standing stone to the next. Always he made us wait between our journeys. It was disorienting. It still makes me queasy to think of it. He knew the danger of what we did. On one of our leaps, we traveled to an abandoned city. He halted, then spoke again quietly. I hadn't been there before, but there was a tall tower in the middle of it, and when I climbed those stairs, I found the map, and the broken window, and the fingerprints in the soot from the fire. He paused. I am sure it was the map tower you visited once. Kelsengrom. So the dragon traders name it now, I said, not wanting to divert him from his revelations. At Prilkop's insistence, we stayed there 5 days. I remember it strangely. Even knowing what the stone can be and do, having it speak to one continually is wearing. I felt I could not escape the whispers no matter where I went. Prilkop said it was because of the silver on my fingertips. The city drew me. It whispered stories to me when I slept, and when I was awake it tried to draw me into itself. I gave in once, Fitz. I took off my glove and I touched a wall in what had been a market, I think. When next I knew myself as myself, I was lying on the ground by a fire, and Prilkop had all our things packed. He wore elderling garb and had found some for me as well, including the cloaks that help one hide, one for each of us. He demanded that we leave immediately, declaring that travel through the pillars was less dangerous to me than spending another day in the city. He said it had taken him a day and a half to find me, and that after he had dragged me away, I had slept for another full day. I felt I had lived a year in Kelsengrom. So we left. He paused. Are you hungry? I asked him. He considered the question carefully. My body has not been accustomed to regular meals for quite some time. It is almost strange to know that I can ask you for food and you will give it to me. He coughed, turning aside as he did so and hugging his belly against the stream. The coughing went on for some time. I fetched him water and he sipped from the cup, only to go off into an even worse spate of coughing and wheezing. When he could draw a full breath and speak, tears had tracked down his cheeks from the effort. Wine, if we have it, or brandy, or more water, and something to eat. But not a lot, Fitz. I must go slowly. So, I think I will stop there. And I'll open it up if anybody has questions or comments or...
So I'm just wondering how it affects your work to have like such a regular publishing schedule and such like a neatly organized series.
I wish I was as neatly organized as my publishing schedule is. Theoretically, I turn in a book every year, and this year I am yet again late turning it in. So I'm not going to be able to go to Saskatchewan. I have to stay at home and do my homework. And having a deadline is really good for me. If I didn't have a deadline, chances are I would never finish a book. There's always things I want to go back and change and fix and rethink. And having a deadline makes me finally make a commitment to the story and say, okay, this piece at least is finished. So it's helpful to me to the point where I like to set deadlines for other things in my life and at least aim for them. And it does help me to get things done. But I need those deadlines in order to complete a book a year. Yes?
Do you ever look back on something that you had done with the plot previously and think, oh, I wish I had done that differently because it's going to make it hard for me to do this other thing I want to do now?
I think I always envy Tolkien because he had completed all of his book before it was published. So there is always that moment of wanting to write something and saying, this is going to feel like I dragged it in by the ears. I wish I could go back to book 2 and just put in 3 sentences or foreshadow this a little bit. But you don't have that luxury. And of course, once the book is published, it is set in stone. That's exactly what happened. And you can't go back and tinker with it.
Tolkien went back and changed the Hobbit.
A little bit. There is I've seen the revised one. I have the old one, so. But I don't think he changed significant events in The Hobbit. There were no conflicts with what happens in The Lord of the Rings. One significant event? Okay, I'll buy it. Which one?
Gollum, the interaction with Gollum and how Gollum felt about the ring.
Oh, okay.
We had to set that up because how Gollum felt about the ring in the first book was not
Not as complained.
reflective of what the reality of the ring was.
Oh.
He gives the ring away as a present.
Yes, he gives the ring as a present. Gollum loses the
I'll have to go back and look
loses the
that
riddle
up.
game, and he gives him the
And he
ring.
gives it.
And then he lets him
Oh.
go free. He actually guides Bilbo out of it.
I'll have to go back and look that up. I wasn't aware of that.
Kind of in relation to about your schedule, I'm kind of wondering, I'm sure you maybe heard George Martin talk about how, I think he said some writers are, is it architects, and then some are gardeners, and he's a gardener, so sometimes things change quite significantly as he goes. He has kind of the end in sight, but I'm wondering if you write that way, or I mean, if you must have to more of an outline if you want to.
At one time, my editors really wanted an outline for every book, and I would write an outline and turn it in, and then I would write the book. And I probably could take any one of those outlines and write a book that would be completely unrecognizable from what I eventually wrote. For me, I usually know the beginning and the ending, and I know some of the major points I have to hit. But in between, things happen. There's dialogue I didn't foresee. There's characters wandering through that I didn't necessarily know would be there. So I guess I fall somewhere in between. I don't do a very hard and fast outline. When I'm drawing close to the end of the book, I make what I call my map to the end of the book, which is like chapter 27, this will happen, chapter 28, this has to happen, chapter 29. And that's just kind of keeps me on the route and make sure I eventually do get to the end.
So you're moving on to, and this is the third distinct trilogy involving Fitz, and each ending of the trilogy kind of feels final, especially the ending of the second one. Did you always know that you were coming back at the end of each trilogy?
At the end of Assassin's Quest, I was sure that I would have finished writing about Fitz and the Fool. I knew that other things happened and things would continue in the world, but I really didn't think I would come back to their point of view and tell more of their specific story. It's kind of strange. I think that with almost any character in the book, I can tell you what happened to them 10 years after you last saw them, whether it's Hans and his children, or what happens to, Lacey, from when I was writing earlier. But I did not really expect to come back to them after Assassin's Quest. So it's always a surprise.
I'm just curious, before you started writing the Farseer trilogy and the Live Ship trilogy, how extensive was your knowledge of things like old world weaponry and the workings of a ship? And how much do you have to educate yourself?
I have a lot of research books, and a lot of it is, as I am writing, I will suddenly realize I don't know that, and I need to know enough that the character appears to know it. So, for instance, Molly's beekeeping. I knew very, very little about beekeeping, but I had to know enough to make it seem that Molly knows everything about it. So my method for researching something like that is to go to the library or a bookstore and I get a children's book on it, because it will have lovely illustrations and it will have all the most fascinating facts, and then it has a great bibliography in the back. So that is like, this is my guide to finding out what I really need to know. With the maritime stuff, because my husband is like 4th generation maritime, our house is stuffed full of sextants and baleen and other politically incorrect parts of sea mammals, and old charts, a logbook from one of the ships he was on when he was a kid, because he literally grew up on his dad's fishing vessel. So there's just a lot of stuff, and his friends come and go, and they're full of stories, and there are stories of what their grandfather told them. His dad, okay, that's not funny. This is my sister Kay, who is usually in Antarctica. So that, seriously, she's usually in Antarctica or New Zealand. So this is like, weird. With no warning.
The book came out a day ahead here from tomorrow.
So you
it's
flew
in
here from New
Zealand.
Zealand to get it early, right? Artie B's had a whole rack of them in the store there. They sent me a picture. Okay, and I've completely lost track of what I was saying. My husband's father grew up during the Depression. He had a couple of younger brothers. He had a whole fascinating story of his own, but the culmination of it is when he was 12, he lied about his age, got onto a ship that was going to Africa to bring back zoo animals. And that was his first voyage. And so he was always telling stories. So and it was actually a sailing ship. So that was, you collect all those bits and pieces and then try to verify as much as you can.
Well, then you have so much good information about ships and stuff. Are you thinking about going back to the live ships then?
I never, I will finish this book, and right now my focus is just right in front of me of I have to finish this book, and then I have all kinds of ideas, and I don't really know what I'll write next at this point. I just need to get this one done.
I remember Fool's Fate being much longer than the previous two books in the trilogy. I was wondering if you had an estimated page count for the third one.
I don't. I will tell you that my editors, Anne and Jane, cut 35,000 words off the end of this book, and it's now the first 35,000 words of the next book, and which, in terms of keeping a word count and trying to keep it to a trilogy, has really impacted me, and so I'm looking at plot threads and saying, can I keep this, or do I have to throw it out, or if I write a fourth book, I think they'll come after me with hatchets. It's just not a thing that anybody's prepared for. So it's I will probably do what I've done before, which is I will write the whole thing and I will send it to them, and it's up to them to figure out what is disposable and what's got to stay. So that's what editors are for. They make the hard decisions sometimes.
Do you have any specific inspiration for the still magic?
Not really. I mean, in some ways, it's simple telepathy, like we've seen in a thousand science fiction novels and in fairy stories, where people are mind readers. So it starts out as being like telepathy, but in how you can influence people's thinking or infiltrate their dreams. It's a little bit more than that. But no specific, like not a single book or fairy tale that inspired it.
Yeah, in Inheritance, you wrote that a writer's life invariably influences other stories.
Oh, yes.
And I was wondering what forces in your life come into this book.
I think the inevitability of aging, the reality of it, that it's not something that people do because they made a foolish decision. It's something that happens to you. And that it's not something where you get a lot of choices. Some of us are better preserved than others. Some of us, really use up our bodies along the way, and others of us will totter into, their 10th decade and still be able to do things. But I think it's the inevitability of aging and of the way you look back on things and see things you did so differently from how you saw them at the time. So there's quite a bit of that in here.
Do you have any thoughts about returning to the Soldier's Son setting?
There's definitely more to tell to that story. I don't know, as I say right now, my vision is limited to this book and to getting it done. So after this is done, I'll have to take a breath and figure out what comes next. And I'm sure pretty soon my editors will start asking that horrible question too, and I won't have an answer.
I was wondering if, that you have so many characters and so many plot lines going, are you visual? Do you have like a board where you have it all written out and yarn going from here to there so you remember who did what to?
Not so much. A lot of it seems very inevitable to me. I do a much better job of keeping track of things than I used to, in that I will, the first time I use a proper noun or name a character, that character immediately goes into a glossary, where I enter it alphabetically and it's saved on my computer, and I will reference the paragraph that first describes the character, and I will say this character first appears in this book in this chapter, because page numbers will vary widely when it comes into production.
Could we have your glossary?
Is that in something like Scrivener or something like that, or do you have your own computer program? Do you have your own glossary, or?
Yeah, I just keep it as a Word file.
Oh, okay.
It's saved in like 6 different places, and they're all updated at different points, so it's always a mess. But I can usually find what I'm looking for, and if that fails, I go to a website called theplenty.net, which has a very nice and very helpful Wikipedia. And I keep promising the proprietor that I will send her the full glossary, and I never get around to it because it's always full of misspellings and spoilers for the next book, and remember about this. So one of these days I will sit down and send it to her and let her fill in all the blanks.
When you first began writing about Fitz and Night Eyes, did you always think that Night Eyes' personality would be the way that it is, kind of like mindful and stoic, or did you ever envision him a different way in Fitz's life?
Well, I think that he grew up, the character grew up very much the way all the characters theoretically should grow up. You know, from the time he's a cub to the time he's a full-fledged wolf, he becomes a different creature. And I think that he's based somewhat on a lot of wolf hybrids that I've known, and how they behaved when they were cubs and how they behaved when they were full-grown dogs. And so I guess I always saw him the way he turned out to be.
When will Fitz get his own movie or HBO series?
From time to time there have been nibbles of interest, but to actually have something go from a book to a TV series or a movie is a really complicated process that easily falls apart at any step along the way. So while there have been some interest, it's never really exploded into a full-fledged, we're going to do this thing. So, and it's one of those things where, you know, George Martin has been very hands-on with the transformation from book to movie, or book to film. But he has a very deep background in film. I mean, he wrote for TV, and he has the knowledge to be very hands-on. Whereas for someone like me, I would have to say, okay, I'll turn it over to you. You seem to know what you're doing. You seem to have a good track record, and I will trust that you will do something worthwhile with it. But it would be a very different experience for me. I would not have near the hands-on control that someone like George or J.K. Rowling did. So.
I'm just curious, could you tell us about your writing process when you wake up in the morning? Can you just give me a quick, I'd like to know.
I wish I was a lot more organized than I am. On a very good writing day, I get up in the morning and I always read the newspaper as it comes in paper. It is my first thing in the morning with coffee, just find out what's happening in the world, and in you know, Tacoma, because that's my hometown, and I'm not going to find detailed news on Tacoma anywhere else really. So I always read my newspaper first, and the computer gets turned on pretty fast. I now have to check my email, and sometimes I will check social media before I actually start writing. And how much email I have to answer or how much social media I have to respond to can be a real roll a big rock through my day, you know, depending on what's going on. But basically the computer stays on all day long, and it's open to the Word file, and I will write for a while, and then I will get up and go do something else, run a load of laundry, or go buy the groceries, or whatever ordinary task needs doing, and then I'll come back and I'll write some more. Generally speaking, it gets turned off about 11 o'clock at night, and I'm up at about 6 o'clock in the morning, but I'm not writing continuously all those hours. It's a coming and going process. On days when I'm entirely alone in the house, when my husband is off doing something and I don't have any grandkids or anybody around, I do a lot more writing than on the days when everybody is coming and going all around me and there's a lot more going on. So it fluctuates with how my life goes. When the kids were little, it was a matter of write anywhere I can, anytime I could, whether it's waiting for a bus or sitting in a dentist's office or at the playground. I always had a notebook in my purse and a pencil. So now it's a lot more of a luxury of writing on a computer and getting it actually typed in the first time, rather than transcribing at the end of the day.
So how much editing do you do after the fact? Or are you editing while you're writing?
Oh, it's always for me, my books are more woven than linear in that I write from beginning to end, but if I get stuck, I will back up a chapter and say, I'm just going to go through this and align things and add a little bit of description here and fix something there. And usually I will come to a place where I'll say, okay, this is why the story stuck. It's because this wouldn't have happened this way, or this character wouldn't have made this decision. And once I change that, the story starts flowing again. But I go back into chapters all the time. And I also have what I call my go-back file on the computer, which is, I'll be in the midst of writing something and I will think, I really needed to foreshadow this, or there should have been a conversation about this, or there should have been something. And then I'll open up the go-back file and I'll say, go back to such and such, prior to chapter 12, make a mention that he's allergic to such and such, that it will make him sneeze or something. And so the foreshadowing sometimes gets put in right before I send it off to the editor.
I don't know how to phrase this properly, but I just want to express admiration for the contract you seem to have with your readers. If you start a tale, it will be finished, and you will write it until it's done. There are series that may never be done.
It's
I started reading The Wheel of Time at Christmas in 1996. Took a long time. It had already been out for a while. Some of it. I'm 77. I don't expect to live to the end of Game of Thrones. Yours, I think I will.
I certainly hope so. And and writers are human, and things happen to us that can, either, really mess up your creativity or simply things that are happening is I have a degenerative arthritis, otherwise known as normal wear and tear on your joints. And so the other day I did an AMA on Reddit, and after 2 hours I just had to stop and say, my hands are hurting and I'm going to have to stop answering questions and come back and maybe finish this another day. So I see things happening to writers where, I think we're still waiting on the last Dangerous Visions, aren't we? So, and nobody knows what that is. Oh my gosh. That's Harlan Ellison's, okay, well, anyhow, look it up. It was the book we were all waiting for about, 30 years ago?
I've totally gone up for about 12 books I was done.
Yes, yeah, so it's, things happen. But I definitely, I'm going to stay home and get this done one way or another. So, yes?
Going into Fool's Assassin, did you know that you were going to make a second character a point of view? / what went into that decision, because it was a big shift from the previous Fitz books?
It was a tough decision, and originally, when I wrote Fool's Assassin, that book and this book have been more heavily edited probably than any other books I've written, because I initially went into it and it was every other chapter, because I felt that was important to do, and my editors both said, no, that's not working. Go back and redo all that. All that stuff that was first person, make it third person now, and figure out a way to have him be there. And that was really the question, is I needed a viewpoint character who was there for critical moments. And there were just some things that Fitz wasn't there for, so I needed a viewpoint character who could tell that part of the story.
Could you talk a little bit about your editing process and how long you spend going back and forth with your editor, maybe some of the bigger decisions that have arisen out of that through your various books?
Well, obviously on the first book it was them saying, we're not going to do this alternating chapter. You need to find a different way to approach the story, and it's fine if the second narrator comes in much deeper into the book than I'd initially planned. Another one was the removal of 35,000 words from the end of this book and transferring it to the beginning of the next one, because what that did to me is that the second narrator's chapters had to be slid back in, and they had to be slid back into the time stream in a way that fits. And so it meant changing the seasons in some of the scenes. So it can get really tricky. I've been working with Jane Johnson for probably pretty close to 30 years now. And so she knows the story absolutely, the whole thing. And I've worked with Anne Grill on and off for probably a good 15 years. So these are editors who I really, really, really trust. And when they offer a firm opinion, and especially when both of them agree, then I know that it's time to really look at that and say, that needs to be changed then. I don't view them as you know, somebody doing a terrible thing to me. They are making it the best possible book. And so that's how we work together. Yes?
So much of popular fantasy seems to happen in like in the medieval era and like the 15th, 17th century, like that. What is your opinion on why is there not more, let's say, like Stone Ages or 20th century, 21st century, like fantasy, not science fiction, but fantasy?
I think we do have some stuff that is written that definitely goes into other eras, but not a lot of it. I think what it has to do with is the fairy tales that we share culturally, whether it's Little Red Riding Hood or Cinderella. We have a tremendous worldwide shared literature that is from that era. So it's really the once upon a time for many cultures and many people. And when you set a story there, people, they kind of feel at home. They know what to expect. And it makes it very accessible as a story, I think. So it's not to say that, you know, we couldn't go back and set something in Stone Age times, but then you're removing it so far from our common experience that I think it's a harder story to tell. Especially with fantasy, because in fantasy, you know, we're setting up not just the real world, but we're setting an overlay of fantasy and saying, now in this world, these special rules apply and these special objects exist. And it's not like, you know, when I'm saying, you know, they left the bookstore and got into a Chevy and drove off, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have to say, you know, what it looks like and what it feels like and what it smells like in order to bring you into the story. So we go back to our shared once upon a time, and it works well. Yes?
So when you start a new story, or like whether it's a live ships or a new branch of Fitz, do you plot out like all the characters and who they are and what they're going to do and develop them ahead of time, or is it just randomly a new chapter? Oh man, this guy's here and he's a new person.
It happens a lot like that. For me, the story always starts with a character, not a plot. And it's a character who steps out onto a stage and starts telling you about themselves and their lives and what's going on in their life, and what terrible thing is going to befall them or what wonderful thing they expect to happen. And then the story kind of falls into place around them, including minor characters who they interact with, whether it's a parent or a cousin or the blacksmith down the road. All of these people just start stepping onto the stage until it's a moving tapestry of what's going on. So for me, it always starts with characters more than plot, and it may take me several years of thinking about it before I actually sit down and start writing. But I don't necessarily have it all written out in an outline. The pieces that are really strong stay with me. Other pieces fall by the wayside, or that isn't going to work now, and I discard it. So, but it's pretty much how it unfolds.
You know, like with the ending, you don't know the ending until like partway through.
Endings I usually know. I usually, when the character begins telling the story, usually there's an ending that's in sight, or several endings, and I know which one is the most, in my viewpoint, the most likely to occur. And I'm writing towards that ending.
I've noticed that with your Robin Hobb books, you have a pattern to your titles. So I was wondering if the third one, if you know the title yet, and if so, is it Assassin's Fate?
It is Assassin's Fate, yes. We just keep recycling words. And after I did that, several people said, it's very confusing because I thought that was a book I'd already read, and so maybe that wasn't the best decision ever. It's really hard, yes. I mean, if you've ever seen Romancing the Stone, where she's sitting and crying into her typewriter and has notes of her violation, I know that I am not the only writer that does that, and where it's really, really hard. When I was writing Royal Assassin, the second book, I sent it off to Jane, and she sent it back to me and said, I know you don't want to write these end chapters, these end scenes in detail, but you have skipped over so much stuff that I can't really figure out what happened. So go back, and yes, you have to write it, no matter how uncomfortable it is, page by page, day by day, what happens. And so I did, but it's not a comfortable thing for me anyway. I don't delight in scenes of torture and mayhem. They're not my favorite thing.
Would you say therefore then you write as an observer rather than the protagonist whose voice you're using?
When I'm writing in first person or very tight third person, I'm really putting on that character like you put on a coat. And for the time that I'm writing that character, whether it's a villain or a hero or male or female or young or old, I really have to put on that mindset and agree with them 100%, even if I think that what they're doing is abhorrent. I need to believe along with them that this is the right thing to do in order to write them convincingly. So,
Which makes the uncomfortable parts even more uncomfortable.
Yes, very. When somebody's doing something you really wish they wouldn't do, you still have to write it that way. It's horrible, but it's necessary to stay true to the characters. I'm very, very fond of Fitz, but again, he's not somebody you really want to have dinner with.
But you're saying you put on his cloak, but then he does things sometimes you just want to go, no.
Don't do that. You know it's going to end badly, but there are times in my life when I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be okay. and then later on I'm standing there going, I knew that this was going to happen. I knew it, and I still did it. And I think we all do that. Some people say, why is he so oblivious to things? But I do that. I watch people I care about make decisions. Yes, I left my license at home. I'm just going to drive just this once, and I've only had 2 beers, and I'm don't do it. Don't do it. but people do it.
Standing in the chair to change a light bulb, even as you know.
Oh yes, yes. standing on the dining room chair that has the soft cushion seat. Yes, and reaching, yes. And
Don't do that.
you always think it's going to come out okay, and sometimes it does, and that's what tempts you to do it again. So.
I have really enjoyed reading your mothers and their Fitz series, especially this last one. And I was wondering if you're going to at all talk about Fitz's mom at any time, and is there going to be any kind of reveal before all the series is over?
I have no idea. It would have to come into the story in a compelling way, and especially at this point where I'm 32,000 words in the hole. It would have to be something that I absolutely could not leave out of this particular book. So maybe in the future. Who knows?
I'm curious about something you said about.
Good evening, shoppers. University Bookstore will close in 10 minutes. Please begin making your final selections. Thank you.
You said that when you write, you have at least an idea of what the end of the series is. You wanted to know what it means. It just reminded me of something that the Fool say. So I was wondering, like, it made me wonder if the Fool, if you envision him as standing in for the author, like how much do you identify specifically with the Fool as an author?
And not really. He has his vision of how the world should go and what he needs, and he's had these visions or dreams of a pathway that if he can make certain key events happen, then it makes other things possible that weren't possible before. And so I only wish my life were like that, where it's odd. My husband and I were talking. We were driving to town today, and we were talking about key moments of where things happened that we had absolutely no control over. And he had dropped out of college, and it was in the days of the draft, and he'd been dodging pretty successfully, and finally he just said, I'm done with it. And he just went in and said, okay, I'll take my physical, let's do it. And they flew him down to Anchorage, and he went through his physical, and they said, at that time I think they could draft you into the Marines if they wanted, as opposed to just the Army. So he was getting shuttled in that direction, and the lottery happened. And his birthday came up number 312. Do you guys know what the draft lottery was?
Yeah.
Where suddenly, instead of just being based on who and where you were, your birthday determined if they called you up or not. And so because he was number 312 and the state was Alaska, and there was a quota from each state, they just said, we're not likely to call you up, you can go. And so later that year, we got married. If he had been called up and gone off to serve, a 2-year hitch at that time? A 2-year hitch. Chances are I never would have seen him again. And he would have been a very different person. So we were talking about, just that drawing of his birth date, something we had absolutely no control over, and it changed both our lives. So there's those little key moments that you can look back in your own life and say, there'll be little tiny trigger events that made other things possible. And it's really strange sometimes to realize that everything you are now teetered on that one moment in time, some random little thing that you couldn't control. But what if you knew and you could control it? Well, we're pretty close to 8 o'clock. Should we be wrapping up questions, or?
Wrap it up. We're gonna leave the register over there open just because I figure someone's gonna have to change their mind.
Okay.
The look of guilt, we should probably, unless there's someone that has an absolutely major question they gotta ask, it's kind of like. Okay. We'll let her sit down and sign.
Okay, sounds good.